No, the dog is going to be a Camp Bow Wow.
Right, yeah.
Oh no, there's no place for the pooch. That would be a drive, and then we'd have to. I mean, he likes the ocean.
The drive isn't worth it.
It is a long drive down to Jacksonville. No,
Done that way.
no, I bet you have.
Yeah, that drive is awful. What PowerPoint are we on?
And okay, so beginning now, we're recording. Okay, this is the one I'm going to be using versus. Okay, you might recall when we met last time. I'll show you the other PowerPoint. This is what we were using previously. We had used the Cowan textbook, which is the textbook that you have, but it's only talking about these sense strands, which I don't employ. My part of this is to tell you a little bit about the different categories of viruses. Today will certainly be dedicated to DNA viruses and perhaps the start of some RNA viruses. And then Wednesday will be the remainder of the viruses and hopefully anything else we have to cover because there isn't a whole lot as we get toward the end of the chapter comparatively. Most of it is here. And so I want to acquaint you with the classification with a sense of so these are the major categories of DNA viruses. The ones that you need to be familiar with, I will remind you each time we cover it. And again, if you want to paint with a broad brush, which you really shouldn't, okay, DNA viruses have an alarming tendency to become latent. And for a couple of these, once you have them, you have them. Again, whether they're going to cause damage to you going forward, we don't know. So the way, okay, this is the Nestor PowerPoint or Chapter 11 PowerPoint.
11,
Okay, Chapter 13 rather. I beg your pardon.
okay.
So I'll be happy to show you on the blackboard
Yeah, that'd be great.
issue
It's
where
only
you.
week 2.
It's week 2 again. Here, let me get over here. Just take a few seconds for them to ramp up to speed. So everybody, yeah, and I use this. I flip flop because their illustrations and their arrangements are a little bit to me better done. I mean, I like aspects of both. So as you work your way down, it'll say, there's the one we've been using with Cowan. Okay, a lot. And here, Nestor's virus chapter. Okay, that's the one. Okay, and so that is what we were on. It comes early. I don't recall the exact page number, but wherever it starts,
We were on
10, 11, and 12. Okay, so here we go. And there's not flipping a lot of pages, mostly me talking. So what do you need to know? Is it naked or enveloped? We're going to do the naked ones first. Okay. Generally, it's architecture. And believe me, this is remember exceptions. In this particular category, with the exception of the pox viruses, they are all isometric or icosahedral. And one is by far and away the most common. So there's basically naked ones and really the ones that are of relevance to us that are enveloped are only 2 categories, pox and herpes. And herpes is a big category, not as simplistic as you see it here. And I'll write that up on the board in a bit. On the other hand, these are the naked viruses. Why the significance of naked viruses? Because they've survived for long times on surfaces, particularly if there's any moisture on the surface. Drying may be somewhat effective, but any type of moisture. So that's the big problem with, let's say, a cold virus, like adenoviruses effectively are. They're very easy to spread because somebody sneezes and maybe there's some mucus with it and it gets on a surface and you come in contact with it, all of a sudden it's there. And remember, how do they come from being on a surface to us? If you touch the surface with a virus like that, you touch your face on average 5,000 to 8,000 times a day. So it's easy to do this now. It's in proximity. Think how often you breathe. Constantly touch. That's the whole idea of hand care, hand care, hand care. I mean, you're limiting the likelihood. If you touch something, I mean, you can be obsessive about it if you want. I wouldn't be, because then you're going to damage your skin. And we're going to get to the skin diseases aspects down the road anyway. Moreover, let's begin. We'll start with the most common one that has the most significant implications vis-a-vis cancers, much more so in both men and women, but much more so in women, and that's good old HPV, which we visit any number of times. We visited in genitourinary diseases, we visited in skin diseases, and we visited here. And what is interesting about that, the most common presentation is the garden variety wart. Okay, there's a lot of different, we call them viruses, we use types rather than species. And certain types are associated with the common wart that you see on the skin. These are what is interesting about them. So they're non-enveloped, so they're very easy to spread, and we get them from contact. By definition, they're sexually transmitted, but does not mean that it has to be by intercourse or sharing needles or bloodborne pathogens or any of that stuff. It's frictional contact for the most part with a lot of these that are there. When most people get a wart on the bottom of their foot, the classic examples, they'd go to the Y, they'd go to a public pool, they'd go to the gym, and there'd be a non-skid surface. In the old days, they used burlap. Now they use those little nylon that have bristles on them because they're relatively easy to clean. And you step on them, and they would infinitesimally penetrate your skin. Because remember, this is a virus that hangs out in the epidermis. You don't need to draw blood to get a wart. Effectively, you're inoculating into the epidermal layer. Its home, if you remember back from AP1, is called the stratum granulosum. When we look at a wart pathologically to make the diagnosis, we look for what are called inclusion bodies. Viruses kind of leave their imprint in that area, and they stain, a particular stain in the nucleus of those cells, and that's how one diagnoses it. Because remember, when we remove something, I've removed thousands over the years, that's the way we have to make that diagnosis. So long story short, we get a lot of, but it's mostly contact. So even though it could be transmitted during intercourse, from a standpoint of genital warts, it does not have to be. Okay, it can just be a frictional component from the act of close and intimate contact of any type. Or for that matter, any kind of prolonged skin-to-skin contact. Okay, pretty hard to avoid, and that's why when we go back and look at HPV vis-a-vis genitourinary stuff and the usage of Gardasil and other similar immunizations in an effort to prevent this, and it's an interesting topic that we go with more with genitourinary stuff. It's significant because conceivably, based on that, it could very well be something that we can avoid. This is, to me, the single most common source of virus-created cancers. And yes, they can be deadly. No question about it. But for our purposes for now, naked virus, isometric, DNA virus, spread, because that's kind of the chart you need to make up. Genome, naked or enveloped, architecture, isometric, how is it spread? Okay, so close contact, sustained close contact, if you want to call it, bloodborne pathogens, sexually transmitted, they're all sort of in the same little close. They used to be considered as one with this subcategory called polyoma viruses. When I learned about them initially, we called them, it's a fancy name, you don't have to call papova virus. Okay, papilloma, polyoma, vacuolating agent viruses was the acronym. Polyoma is interesting. Again, notice it's on the skin. So for you fans of music through the ages, one of the most famous mainstream folk singers died recently of Merkel skin cancer, roughly 74, Jimmy Buffett. Okay, who was very popular and still very popular, and did all of his recordings down in Key West. Key West is fun.
Your retirement village.
Yeah, Key West is okay.
Yeah.
Key West is expensive. I love Key West because they used to have cockfighting, so the chickens are all run free. So when you walk around Key West, in the morning, you wake up to chickens. Cockadoodle doodling at 4 o'clock in the morning. My wife and I love it. Just no Key West fans? Garbo's Grill. The best Korean beef tacos you ever had in your life. Featured on diners, drive-ins, and dives. Delicious. Oh my goodness. Moving on. Sorry, food moment there. And you can watch the video how they're made. Fabulous. but he died of that. So it's not one that you have to necessarily recall, but it means it's significant. Okay, so the big one here is HPV. Adenoviruses, a common source of a cold. Adeno means gland, again, naked, isometric, as these first three have been. These are spread respiratorily. This one would have been, again, as far as we know, that close, intimate contact of some type. This is spread respiratorily. So it's more of the bad cold. When we do the unit on respiratory diseases, you will see it's that cold that's got the sore throat, got the swollen glands, maybe has the fever. And actually they have been talked about vaccines for it over the years. There's so many subtypes. It's one of the reasons why we don't have one. We really can never develop one for, let's say, the common cold, because again, there are just too many of them around to make that feasible. A little bit less so with these. And the last, and I mentioned this in passing when we talked about parvoviruses, how small they are, is this one. And we get to it in skin diseases, again, isometric and naked, most likely spread respiratorily. Again, if I don't know, if I give you a most likely or maybe, it means I'm not going to ask you about it. Because if I don't know for sure, I wouldn't expect you to know for sure. And this is called Fifth's disease. We'll get to this in skin diseases. Before they knew viruses from bacteria, from fungi, they made a list of, back in the early 1900s, of the most common skin diseases. Okay? And so they began things like measles and scarlet fever. And the fifth one on the list, they called, for no other better reason, Fifth's disease. And I'm willing to bet that many of you had that as children. All three of my kids did. Another name we give it, and you'll see it, is called slack cheek syndrome. So it's a relatively, when you see fever and a rash in a child, you start thinking about something bad. But the reality is the fever is relatively low grade, and it's typically facial. And we'll see some images of this that are there. My kids had it, it goes away. It kind of looks like it's like you smacked your. I know you're not supposed to do that. No one ever told my mom and dad about it. They missed the memo. My kids did not miss the memo. I got angry. 1-800 for a child. That's my kids. You saw that. I got them now. Same routine I do every year. Now they come near me, look angry. Elder abuse. I'm calling the senior citizen center. Used to get a better laugh. Okay, moving on. So those are your four not enveloped, I beg your pardon, isometric viruses. Not sure how this spreads. You'll see I'm leaving herpes for the last because there's a lot of them, and I have to write on the board, which leaves us, and I have it on a handout, I think, on the blackboard. And if not, I will make sure it's on there. In passing, pox viruses. Now, this is the first of all, this is enveloped, so it's a little easier to get rid of on surfaces. The classic example, you already heard about smallpox with regard to Jenner, and you heard about cowpox, which is in the same category. By definition, it's an odd shape. This is one that would categorize as pleiform. So far, it's not a big deal. Smallpox, as far as we know, has been eradicated. Last known case was 1977 in Somalia, in Africa. I've never seen any cases, just pictures, certainly. Cowpox, I'm unfamiliar with, whether it's still present or not. There is, and those, we know the cowpox, and this is the example, it is, the fact that it's in a category doesn't mean they're all transmitted the same way. These categories are based on naked, genome, and shape, not about spread. So there are subcategories. So smallpox is respiratory. That's why it's a major bioweapon threat over the years. It kills within 3 or 4 days. It's spread respiratorily. If somebody had that in this room and we were in a closed space for any period of time, we would all have it. That's why it was always been worried about it, and that's why the government and the agencies that handle that type of stuff still have vaccines and treatments and bioweapon stuff that goes on. It's one of those, people have, it's forgotten but not forgotten, to be very honest with you. The cowpox, I'm not that familiar with. We think it's spread by contact, as the milkmaids were just milking by hand back in the old days. There is an oddball one. It's called molluscum contagiosum, and interestingly enough, and I've seen this on more than one occasion, it is a sexually transmitted disease, not unlike the wart. It's all about physical contact and different molluscum contagiosum. Contagiosum is spread so easily. Molluscum, because when you see it, it's got it looks like a raised red area with a white center, and it reminded anatomists of viruses that it looked like a pearl in an oyster. Classification for oysters, clams, mollusks. Basic bio, vertebrates, invertebrates. Okay, among strangers. So molluscum contagion. I've seen several cases. It's frictional. We typically see it in men and women on the upper thigh, vis-a-vis friction in and around intercourse or intimate contact. It's very easy to treat. Okay, it's not one that stays with you. And the way we used to treat it, we would use a local anesthetic and an electric needle. Okay, something called fulguration is a fancy term for that. So we'd numb it and just buzz it, effectively cauterize out, and they were gone. They came back and did the same thing. There was no long-term health problems associated that we were aware of at the time. So that's the whole thing there, which leaves us with the big category, herpetic infections or herpes. So most of you know about herpes. I always do this chart. I have it somewhere. So we classify all of these as human herpes infection, human herpes virus. So they all have HHV. And interestingly, there's more than this, but we have really 7 of them that we consider. And some of them go by different names. They're all significant. The most significant thing about them is they all have the ability to be latent. So, first one, okay, this is called HSV1, known as herpes, which stands for herpes simplex or simple herpes. Type 1, and most of you know this as oral herpes. Something that most of us are exposed to during our lifetime. By the time your age, you pretty much will. You haven't had a cold sore, you're in. Not a problem. They go away, they come back. The big problem with this is latency. Cold sores come back, and the reason with herpetic viruses, we don't understand essentially why they come back when they do. Usually it's associated, that could be someone had a weakened immune system, sick, cancer, aging, heart disease. That could only make sense. Stress is good. A lot of people I've seen, they break out in cold sores, like my wife did before nursing. She was so stressed, she went to successive studies. She was an adult learner. Here's a woman who was in nursing school. She was 50. A long time. So, and she break out with one of those. Very difficult. It's not totally innocent. About 4% of viral meningitis, right, are due to herpes. What happens is a herpetic, and we're going to go over this again at length when we look at it in regard to skin diseases. It hangs out something you probably got in an AP1 from lab called the dorsal root ganglia. The sensory nerve, the ganglia is just outside the spinal cord. That's where herpes viruses live latent. And most of the time it comes out back on your skin to wherever it's going. It's your lip, somewhere else on your body, and we'll get to general herpes in a second. This one, the way it was, I just showed you my daughter's picture. And 14 years ago, she ended up with viral meningitis. They didn't know what caused it. They had to worry about bacterial meningitis. So they basically they put her on, fortunately, the best medicine for herpes virus is the best of the antivirals. That's acyclovir, Valtrex, Alice. We'll talk about that with the antivirals. And it was very successful. They only gave it her for a limited amount of time. It wasn't long enough. She had to go back in the hospital for a few more days. But she was stiff necked, couldn't move. I mean, she had classic meningitis, fever, stiff neck, headaches, that kind of stuff. So that's the way the infectious disease doctor said. Think of it this way: the herpes virus, rather than going out to your skin or your lip, not skin, but lip. Not innocent. HSV2 is the same thing, herpes simplex type 2, okay, genital herpes. In general, more painful. The first outbreak is the worst. Herpetic lesions are not dangerous in the sense of something terrible will happen, okay? Because basically they form little blisters on the skin in and around the genitalia of men and women. The trouble is that interrupts the barrier. When it comes to sexually transmitted diseases, it's all about barriers. We'll get into this chapter and verse. Okay, down the road, we revisit this again. The problem with this, that predisposes somebody with an acute case to be much more liable to get any other sexually transmitted disease. Syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, you name it. Because it's all, prevention from infection, as we'll get to in sports, is all about barriers. Intact skin and intact lining. This is something that makes lining. There's also significant problems in the first attack, particularly in a pregnant woman who's doing a vaginal. Very significant. So that's general herpes. Again, they are not exclusive to those areas. You can get genital herpes orally and oral herpes genitally. Just dependent on your activities. Well, as far as I'm going. Okay, HHV3, very famous, called VZV, varicella zoster virus. Okay, what does that mean? It spread respiratorily. So these are STD, again, one of those categories. This is chickenpox, shingles. This is spread respiratorily. You all effectively have been exposed to this virus. You were either immunized for it, or if you're my age, you had the chickenpox. Even my kid's age, even at 30, when she was 2, she had the chickenpox. So at that point, the virus goes latent anywhere, any peripheral nerve, cranial nerve, whether it's a spinal nerve, in that dorsal root ganglion. It can come out at any time. Don't worry about it, because a third of you are going to get shingles anyway. There's an immunization for people over 60 that ostensibly helps you prevent that. It does. I've had it. Okay, and shingles can affect anybody. My colleague here, who's downstairs in the room below us, for just 3 weeks, he's probably not even 40 years old. His whole face. Pain is extraordinary. Now that we have the Valtrex, it's a little bit easier to treat. We'll get to chickenpox. Chickenpox is very variable. I have 3 kids who got it within 2 weeks of one another. In order of age. My eldest got it. We were very happy. Okay, because he had a really good case, 104 fever. We had 2 other ones trying to make sure they didn't get it. He stayed with grandma and grandpa. You know, got better 7 to 10 days, you know, whatever, and he was fine. 2 weeks to the day he got it, my middle one got it. We were horrified. Not because he got it, he had a mild case. Didn't slow him down. Barely a fever, barely a spot. Remember, they're not biological siblings, no biological. Pretty girl you just saw. 106 fever, nearly life flight occurred at Children's Hospital. 3 different presentations, from normal, the first one, minor, the second one, severe, the last one. If you did not know it in my day and age, when I was in first grade, at the end of first grade, I didn't tell you this anecdote, did I? All of a sudden, we like a lot of neighborhoods in the suburbs, when people had moved out of the city in suburban New Jersey, and we were all in a neighborhood, we all had just filled with kids all the same ages. And we're all going to the circus at Madison Square Garden. We're going to take the bus. We're going to eat at the Automat. You have no idea what I'm talking about, do you? Okay. So it was like a day out. The circus was at the old Madison Square Garden, 8-block walk from the Port Authority bus terminal, which you wouldn't go unless you had an armed guard. The old Madison Square Garden was awful. The Automat was a place where you put nickels in and you twisted it after a certain number of nickels and you got pie or you got a sandwich or you got coffee or whatever. It's an Automat. Mel Brooks has a very interesting thing about it on HBO if you want to look at it, probably on YouTube as well. So we all went. There must have been 10 moms with surely about 20 or 25 kids. Within days of us getting home, we all either got the chicken pox or the measles. And then when we got better from that, then we got the other one. They used to have, the point I'm making is they used to have what are called chicken pox parties. Because the moms wanted you to get it and be done with it. School's out, I'll keep you at home. The moms threatened you had to stay in bed. We'll get into really why that was very significant. You had to stay in bed. You don't have to stay in bed and watch TV all day. Okay, twist my arm. It's my happy place already. Child abuse. Think of it now. Ruth, you're a good thing it wasn't in a modern age with all those social media things. People have been right. You know what those moms did? They exposed their children to deadly diseases. They didn't wear masks. That, ladies and gentlemen, and we will get into this again. We look at skin diseases and its impact respiratorily and the fact that it can be lethal. Shingles is awful. It's very, very hard to do. Very, very painful. Here's one for you, literally and figuratively. For you to know, and for you, unfortunately, this is one that affects college students. EBV, also known as Epstein-Barr. And this is most likely spread STDY. And the name that and the disease it causes, infectious mononucleosis. The kissing disease. Whole same thing. There are cases where it can cause cancerous tumors, just in case you're wondering, though rare, and typically not in this country. It's a disease, and again, these are latent. Once you have it, you always have it. You can get it recurrent. Okay, and again, we don't know what brings it out. My first wife had this when she was a kid, probably in college or nursing school. And then about 20 years later, my kids were, it was 1989, so the kids would have been 6, 5, and 3. She got it again, a recurrent case. So bad, she was in bed for 5 weeks. The most you could do was go to the bathroom. I had 3 little kids. I was seeing patients all day. I had to hire somebody to come in to take care of the kids, off to school, preschool, the usual routine, and then come back there and do it myself because she couldn't. Yeah, recurrent, these quote unquote childhood or youthful diseases are much more severe in adults. Same chickenpox, measles, all of the above. So that's Epstein-Barr. So it's a very common virus. And it's a marker we look at also with certain other things. Again, there's not subtle relationship. One we see in the immunosuppression, same category. It's called cytomegalo. Megalo means big. That's big for virus. Conceivably, it could be mononucleosis, but typically there's the association. Again, I'm not sure how to express. Okay, it's probably somebody who has immunosuppressants. or infants. This is not a good diagnosis. HHV6 doesn't have another name. Okay? It does, so we just call it human herpes 6. These Roman numerals typically. It causes a disease, again, that all my kids had, and probably you will have in childhood, called roseola. The most common of the diseases of skin, not all of them, including viruses and bacteria, is called rubeola. So that's the old name for measles. It's little dots of ruby. These were not as distinctly red, the little rose. Roseola. It looked like measles. The fever was high, and what typically happened, the fever broke. We go over all this again, skin disease. And the rash was subtle, but it then really came out of the abdomen. The fever broke. He was better. So a lot of parents were, oh my gosh, 105 fever, terrible stuff. It's roseola. The interesting thing about that is we are studying now, there's a high with the correlation coefficient in science, means people have this. Doesn't mean cause and effect. With roseola, people with high titers, high levels of antibodies, there's a correlation coefficient with multiple sclerosis. Does it mean it's a cause? No. Is MS considered to be an autoimmune disease? Yes. Could it be playing a role? And then lastly, this doesn't have any another one either, other than human herpes 8, but it is associated with something. And again, I'm not sure about the spread. This one is probably an STD. Disease it causes is very famous. Sarcoma. And that is an AIDS-defining diagnosis. Anybody with Kaposi's, we get a drink, who is HIV positive now has AIDS. It is not only associated, it's not like magically we came up with a name. Kaposi identified, it looks like somebody has pigment tumors. When you did AP1, you learned about skin. Did they talk about melanomas? Melanoma is the worst of skin cancers, very deadly. It looks like a melanoma. It's very pigmented. The interesting thing, why it's a sarcoma, is it affects blood vessel linings. That's connective tissue. That's a sarcoma. Okay? Whereas HPV is a carcinoma because it affects epithelial lines. That's the distinction between the two. The HPV is different in that regard. So what makes Kaposi's sarcoma, again, blood vessel, when it bursts, there's a certain amount of pigmentation. It was described before 1900. HIV didn't exist as far as we know before 1900. But it's associated with immunological faults. I tell everybody the same anecdote. When we get to HIV, I have a lot of exposure to this, not because I had HIV certainly, but because of where I worked and trained for 6 years. I went to school and did my residency in Philadelphia. The two largest populations back then, this is between 1973 and 1979, of gay men, statistically based percentage of population, were San Francisco, number one, where AIDS was eventually diagnosed, but was identified, would be a better word, where the article was written that identified HIV and then AIDS. Okay, and Philadelphia, which is number two. So in a space of 6 months, one in 77 and one in early 78, I saw two cases of Kaposi's sarcoma. Most doctors never saw one in a lifetime. I saw 2 cases in our clinics. One at the medical school, one at the hospital where I did my residency. Both individual men, gay men, because the idea of this disease and things like this, and we'll get into when we talk about HIV, when we talk about the disease aspect of it, as opposed to just identifying the source of it and classifying it here and what went on, because we knew something was going on there long before that 1981 article. a lot of gay men were dying. And we had our downstairs neighbor was a gay man with friends in his orbit, and we were very friendly with those folks, my first wife and I, when we were engaged, when we were married, who were dying of AIDS. That they didn't know it. They just called, he's got it. It was very tragic. It's a very interesting story because of the lack of acceptance of this. I told you. Did I tell you? No. No. My first wife ever engaged, she goes to me, she says, I have to tell you something. Oh, here it comes. I have to be John, our downstairs neighbor's date for the Christmas party and the awards dinner at work. Because he can't bring a boyfriend. You know, so I go to those as his girlfriend. Yeah. Okay. And I just wanted to understand. It's all right with me. I don't figure he's going to hit on you. just saying. And that was the case. So, but you know, when are you two going to get married? You're such a cute couple. He's a great dancer. I have two left feet. Literally have two left feet.
You?
I can't dance. Watch a movie called Best in Show. Anybody see that? Two left feet. Moving on. And that, ladies and gentlemen, covers the DNA viruses thoroughly. So we're not done yet. We have RNA coming up. That's usually where I start. I usually get through the first 3 or so of these before I get into the enveloped one. So in RNA viruses, the watchword is mutation. Yes, we're going to get to that. Corona. And yes, we're going to get to that influenza. The big mutators. We have 3 naked viruses. Again, the bulk of these are isometric. Corona is an oddball. Okay. Rabies is an oddball. Ebola is an oddball. Mumps and influenza are oddballs. Most of the rest of these are isometric, even all the way to HIV. There's only 3. So again, remember the ones that are enveloped, because are non-enveloped, rather naked, because everything else is enveloped. And these are the ones that affect us the most. The first one in this category is called Rio. It was actually meant respiratory enteric orphan virus, was where it got its name initially. You'll see it as either rota or rotavirus. It is a significant infantile diarrhea disease. It has become more significant in this neck of the woods. It was for a long time endemic. Okay, important word. In the southwestern United States and the Para-Rio Grande area, Texas, Arizona, all those places where they're all going crazy about the border and all that stuff. Okay. So endemic that over the years, when they talked about this in COVID, you might remember it's called herd immunity. When 90% of the population has it, the virus is there, but it's very difficult to spread. The only people that would be prone to this potentially deadly virus to an infant was somebody who was foolish enough to take a 10-month-old to that area because their immune system would be exposed to something that's totally foreign to them. And a child like that would typically end up in intensive care for a week to 10 days. How do I know this? That's right. My kid. After 5 years of trying to have a kid or adopt a kid, we have a kid, the one whose change of command ceremony is coming up in May, the captain of the ship. We brought him down to visit our very close friends who were in the same adoption group with us, who lived in Texas. We went down to San Antonio, did the river walk. Within 2 days, we did New Year's down there. He's throwing up everywhere. He has diarrhea everywhere. I spent the next 7 nights in Santa Rosa Children's Medical Center to deal with rotavirus. They thought he had meningitis. They had to do a spinal tap. They thought they were going to lose him. We were beside ourselves. We're 2,000 miles away from our pediatrician. The doctor and the nurse, not too smart. If you travel, even in the continental United States, the CDC has a website. Just put CDC travel, precautions going to Texas, precautions going to California. They'll tell you what's flying over there. They probably would say, don't bring a small child. Okay, now there's an immunization now that they're talking about for this. It has started to work its way up there as our population has had an increasing influence from those Mexican, Central American border states, without getting into a discussion about that. I'll go, this will be last. Caliciviridae, because it has a calyx, a shell. Okay, so they describe, when they looked at it microscopically, even though it didn't have an envelope, it had a rather distinct shell. This is another diarrheal disease. This one is really hard to get rid of on surfaces. It's called noro. It used to be called Norwalk virus. Within the last 15 years, it shut down Ringgold School District for 2 weeks here down in the Mon Valley. Give you some context. It's so because it's a small district. They made the food in a central kitchen and sent it to different schools. They didn't know and the trouble is, someone could have it and not know it and be shedding that virus. This is a classic, just like rota, fecal to oral. I should have put that. Okay. So, and the trouble with noro, as soon as somebody gets it severe, now once they know it, it's like, oh my God, I've been working, and I didn't know that little bit of diarrhea I had was this, and it lasts for a long time on surfaces. Whenever you see a cruise ship having to turn around, just look for that in the news. Okay, norovirus, for sure. Because the whole place will be infected. You know, these ships have 2,000 people on them. We were on one cruise many, many years ago. My first wife, 40 years ago. Thankfully, didn't get sick. There's 2,000 people on it. At the time, it was the largest cruise ship in whatever the NCL in the Region Caribbean fleet is. Okay, so that's another one. Easy spread. These, because they're naked, very easy to come in contact with. And the most famous of them all, everybody, pico-RNA viruses. We call them picorna, or if you want to, for short. And again, this is 2 categories. Okay? They are respiratory spread, known as rhino, common cold. You know how easy that is to get? Okay? So many couple of hundred different subtypes. Why would you make a vaccine? There are so many types, and 2, why do you need one? Why would you give somebody the risk of a vaccine is greater than the risk associated with having the disease? It's not a fatal disease. Self-limiting. If you're looking for the cure forever, 7 to 10 days, you get better. Chicken soup, olive oil, depending on your ethnicity. The chicken soup theory. Here, have chicken soup. Ma, would it help? It wouldn't hurt. The old chicken soup. Versus enterovirus. So when you talk about the stomach flu, there is none. It's called an entero or enteric, which means a gut virus. Okay? And a lot of these cross over. They have enteric properties and respiratory. So it can start respiratorily and all of a sudden you have an upset stomach. Most of it's because your immune system is what's doing it. In this category are 2 monstrous players. Polio, which is spread. This is respiratory. This is fecal to oral. So we didn't know for years about that. Poliovirus, hepatitis A, also known as, which is known as infectious hepatitis, and a variety of other ones. One's called Kawasaki, another one's called Coxsackie, and they are nasty. And they're highlighted by really severe diarrhea and fever. So in the couple of minutes I have left, and again, I have like 2 minutes left, I'll give you the short. Hepatitis A caused a chain that was already in bankruptcy, and it happened right around here to finally go under. Chi-Chi's restaurant. In Beaver Falls, that Chi-Chi's, because of green onions, scallions, which they use for garnish, raw, were contaminated with hepatitis A. These, you get any foods you pick, whether, and these came from Mexico, it doesn't matter, California, same thing. They have to be power washed, high pressure water to wash off dirt, which has all sorts of fecal material. There are no porta potties in the field, to get the idea. Yeah, it's a new. Okay. They didn't rinse them. When I have them at home, I rinse them, I scrub them, I slice them, and I rinse them again. 1,000 people became ill because of that spread. 4 people died of all different ages. Wasn't very young or very old. 4 people died. Give you an idea. Polio, the last one. I'll save the polio one because polio we have to talk about because we developed a vaccine where? Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. And one of the doctors who was a resident at the time, taught here for many years. He's one of our professor emeriti, retired professors. You did not know. He used to teach micro here. So I'll leave you with that and see you. I should have the grade stuff done by that time. You'll see it. I'll make another column, adjusted, grades. Goodbye. Have fun. See you later. Nice chatting with you.